A wise man once said, "Life is really simple, but we insist on making it complicated." And that man went on to attempt to simplify way of life. Confucianism, the triumph and tragedy of Confucius. Confucius, or Master Con, was a great philosopher that lived from 551 BCE to 479 BCE. His family didn't have much money when he was young, and he lived poverty-stricken. He got to see firsthand all the terrible ways of living and how some people struggled to make a living. Confucius grew up in the Zhou dynasty that lasted from 1046 BCE to 256 BCE. During this period, the practice of traditional Chinese principles began to deteriorate, causing a period of moral decline. Confucius recognized this and set out to attempt to make the world he lived in a better place by reinforcing compassion and tradition. He visited many cities, but only found mortal chaos. He was very disappointed of this and decided not to go into government and stay in his hometown Lu. Instead, he became a philosopher and took the name of Confucius. Confucius created the ethical philosophy of Confucianism and said he would teach anyone his philosophy. Confucianism followed three main core values. The first was filial piety, the respect for one's parents. This included worship to ancestors to be able to remember them after they died. The second is humanness, which is the care and concern for other human beings. The third was ritual consciousness, the respect for ritual and tradition and the proper way of doing things in the deepest sense. But Confucianism most focused on the principle of Ren, which was the practice of loving others while exercising self-discipline.
Ren is a very splendid word idea, but what does it actually mean? What quality does it imply?
Many people try to translate it differently. It's been translated as human-heartedness, as good or goodness, but we prefer now to use the word simply humanity, because virtually all Confucian values are linked to this notion. Courage with Ren, then it's real courage rather than just simply bravery. Justice with Ren, then it's a humane justice rather than just harsh punishment. Wisdom with Ren, then it's being wise, not just being smart.
Confucius's goal was to try and go back to the unnamed religion of the Zhou dynasty. He wanted everyone to respect Chinese tradition. He also wanted people to care for each other and remember and love their family. He gained a small number of students at the time, and he never turned away anyone to learn his morals. However, Confucianism never gained much ground in the broad scope of China. This was the tragedy of Confucius. The religion of the Zhou dynasty focused more on spirits of good and evil and more on terrestrial forces. No one really focused or followed Confucius's way of thinking. The only people that really cared were Confucius's disciples. Confucius died at the age of 72 in 479 BC. Before his death, he had considered himself a failure. His life had been undramatic, no climax, no martyrdom. None of his chief ambitions had been fulfilled, says Spencer J. Palmer, a coordinator of Asian Studies at BYU. Confucius never considered what he had accomplished as a success. He never got to accomplish his bigger goals and never got his teachings across China. His disciples, however, were still around after Confucius' death, and they even passed down the teachings of Confucius to other generations. His disciples were able to compile most of Confucius' teaching into a book translated into English as the Analects. Along with Analects was the Confucian Classics, or the Five Classics, which contained the Book of Odes, Book of Documents, Book of Changes, Book of Rites, and the Spring and Autumn Annals. These books were the foundation of Confucianism. The disciples were able to pass down the teachings of Confucius even down to the Qin dynasty. However, Confucianism was not very popular during the Qin dynasty either. The main philosophy in the Qin dynasty was legalism. Legalism was the philosophy that every human being would be more inclined to do wrong rather than right because they were motivated by selfishness. Legalist leader Qin Shi Huangdi during the Qing dynasty killed any philosopher that attempted to change their philosophy and also burned many texts. Legalism sadly carried over into the Han dynasty after the Qin dynasty ended in 207 BCE. However, Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty adopted Confucianism as the religion of China when he began ruling in 141 BCE. He was considered one of the best Chinese emperors due to his effective governance. He used the morals and teachings of Confucius to help make state decisions and shape government policies. Emperor Wu also abolished all academic chairs not dealing with the Confucian classics in 136 BCE. Confucianism was looking better than it ever did in influence over China. Almost all of China was following Confucianism. In fact, this philosophy in China during the Han Dynasty was so influential that it was considered a religion. Confucius himself had once said that he never considered himself any divine sage, but people looked up to him as a divine sage for his brilliant teachings. However, all good things must end, and that's the case with the Han Dynasty and its collapse in 220 CE. What came after was the Three Kingdoms Dynasty, or otherwise known as China's Dark Age. During this time, the people of China were really looking for something to help them get through this troubling time of warfare, and Confucianism wasn't able to fill the gap that was missing. They were looking for a more nature-oriented feeling as a religion. That's where Buddhism and the new religion of Taoism came in to be the main religion of this time. Of course, Confucianism was still there, but it wasn't as influential as the other two religions. Those two had the most influence until around 1000 CE during the Song Dynasty. The philosopher Zhuzi was trying to compete with Buddhism and make the Confucianism religion into something more nature-oriented. This new religion was known as Neo-Confucianism.
Zhu Xi's ideas, Zhu Xi's interpretation of Confucianism comes to be the official orthodoxy, and indeed it's given pride of place in the imperial examination system. Zhu Xi's interpretations, his commentaries, are the official version of Confucianism that is used in the examination systems.
Confucianism finally found a new place in the world once again as it had been revived. The religion itself started to make a push for outside of China, including Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. Confucianism stuck around throughout China's history in many different forms, but still the same ideas. When Confucius thought he had failed in the Zhou dynasty, if only he could have lived until the Han dynasty to see how popular his philosophy had gotten. He completed his goal of changing the way the government worked because Emperor Wu took Confucianism as their religion. Confucius actually triumphed over his tragedy long after his death. But what's the actual importance of Confucianism, and is it still around today? Confucianism is in fact still around today and used in other places rather than China. It is found being used in other places of Asia and also in Europe. Confucianism had such a big impact in the world and in history. Today, China uses the system of communism to lead their country, but many morals and ways of thinking are used in their way of communism directly from Confucianism, and that's pretty huge. Confucius set out with the goal to make a life-changing philosophy and to teach many people his thinking. He did just that, but died thinking he had failed in life. But after many years, Confucius didn't fail and instead triumphed over his tragedy when his philosophy became a religion in most eyes during the Han Dynasty and lasted until now present day. As Confucius once said, "Our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising every time we fall."